doing my dance training, we did a lot of Russian character dancing, you know, with the, yeah. So, you know, in Russian, you know, with the Matryoshka dances with the ladies, they have those long skirts and they learn how to move like this without the skirts going all over the shop. Well, the same thing in Chinese opera, you know, they learn how to, yeah, yeah. Now the constraint is you got to keep the knees together more or less. Yeah? Yeah. I'll continue another story. Since you're the only ones here, tomorrow we'll look at the case study with a colleague of mine who, foolishly or wisely, I don't know, one way or the other, decided to employ me as her movement consultant in her one-person show called Chinese Takeaway, in which she played herself, her mother, her father, her alter ego, the warrior woman, her grandmother, and her sister. So she played several different roles. And one of the reasons she hired me was she wanted me to work with her as the movement consultant. And so I helped, my job was to help her to realize these characters. And the character that she had most affinity with was her grandmother. And she described her grandmother as even shorter than herself. This is Anna Yen. Yeah. Even shorter than herself. She didn't use the word squashed, but when I was listening to the word, I heard squashed. So functional integration to the rescue, right? I said, okay, Anna, talk about your mother. So she started to talk about her mother and say some lines of a grandmother in the show, and I just stood above her and I went, and her voice changed. And she said, oh my God, it's my grandmother. I said, yes, that's it. Yeah. So this is another way of using functional integration to change people's personalities, to change their feeling state. Yeah. Another way that I worked with her was when she was being her mother. For those of you who know Anna Yen, she's a delightful person, but she occupies a lot of space. Yeah. She works as a clown. Yeah. She's got a nice energy about her. So to play her mother, she had to walk. This is what's triggered it. Yeah. She had to walk in a particular way. Now, I asked her, who was your mother? She was an immaculately dressed woman, you know, 1950s. And if you remember the skirts in the 1950s, they were hip hugging and very, very narrow around the knees. So, you know, you can't walk like this, like Anna does, you know. You can't walk. Hannah can't walk like Hannah. So I looked around the space and there was a belt or something. So I put the belt around her knees and said, now walk. And she walked like that, which is how, you know, boom. So in the first case, I amplified gravity. She turned into a grandmother. Second case, I created a constraint around her knees, which helped her to turn into her mother. So that's functional integration or good theatre directing, one or the other. I don't know theatre directing, so it must be good functional integration. Yeah? Yeah. You'll see I projected a quote up on the wall there from Sun Bear, alias Vincent Leduc. And I chose it because it relates to what we're doing in this segment. Yeah. There are cultures out there in this world that haven't forgotten the importance of relating to each other and relating to the environment. And trying to promote this in these 2 weeks. Now, a little story. Jenny's going to chat with you about chatting. But first, the story. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of this particular American radio show, but there's a radio show that kind of is like a new agey kind of a thing from United States. And one night they were interviewing, it's a woman actually, she was interviewing a rabbi. This is a follow-up from yesterday, sorry, I'm in a rabbi mode at the moment. She was interviewing a rabbi, and she knew that this rabbi toured extensively through the East Coast, the Bible Belt. And she said, "You travel a long distance, don't you?" He said, yeah, I have to drive a long way. He said, do you ever listen to those preachers on the radio, you know, those fundamentalists? He says, yeah, sometimes I like to listen to them. I like to hear the perspective from the other side. He said, well, you know, what do you think? You know, what do you think about the New Testament? He says, well, you know, we don't have the New Testament. We only got the old one. And I'm curious about how it is that these preachers believe they can quote one little phrase from the Bible and say, you see, that's it. I've nailed it. Argument's finished. And she says, what do you mean? She says, well, you know, when my rabbi friends and I get together, we can take that same text and we have a completely different stance on it. Unless we can come up with at least 5 different defensible positions. Now, defensible means you can argue for it and the argument is tight. You can't pick it apart. Unless we come up with at least 5, we don't feel like we understand it. Can you see the difference between one thing said, bang, that's it, to maybe it's like this, and this is, what's the Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. On the one hand, and on the other hand, if I had more hands, there'd be more hands. That's the nature of that culture. And it's no accident. I believe, speaking as a historian, it is no accident that some of the major scientific discoveries in the 1900s were made by Jews who studied in that fashion the Torah and the commentaries on the Torah. Because there's something about that way of studying. A, you start to develop multiple perspectives. B, and this is, I won't give myself the finger, and B, you don't become emotionally attached to them. I still become emotionally attached to my arguments. Yeah? You might have noticed. They don't. They can switch. Now that's a great thing to be able to do, right? To actually take your stance, say it like that, come over here, oh, different perspective. I'll take this stance now. That's pretty cool. And in a funny kind of a way, this is what you're being asked to do in awareness through movement all the time. Good morning. Oh, yeah. You got great balance.
But I think it's from that. Yeah, I don't feel like I can make a decision most times, and I'm always like, kind of thing. But maybe it's a good thing. I always thought it was a bit.
Yes and no. I can relate to you. Yeah. Very often, I'll be the last person to speak. Yeah. Because I've listened to other people's opinions, and I'm going, yeah, who am I going to align with here? You or you or you?
You made a good point,
or maybe, and after a while, I realized that there's a certain skill in being a fence-sitter, and there's something that you can contribute. But after you've listened to many points of view, you can actually synthesize. Yeah, that's a great skill to have.
just always thought it was a bad thing that I
No,
couldn't decide
no.
something.
You listen to Julieta, then you listen to Gloria, then you listen, and you go, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, and then you go, knit, 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 knit. Yeah, look, you see, you all fit together. Now that person is a very useful person because they bring people together to see the commonalities of their idea. So when you can balance really nicely like that, you're not toppled by anybody's opinion. You're kind of just going, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Does it make sense?
Yep. I just always thought of it as a negative about myself.
So did I. So did I.
Use it.
So that's why I'm sharing that with you. It's not a negative. It's actually in certain contexts, it's a great positive. Yeah. So that's why I immediately said, huh? You're asking the wrong man. It really doesn't matter who you vote for. You'll get the same results. No, honestly, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Because if you vote, no, let's not go there. So now, so that's the story. And you know, we have a way of expressing that, and you've heard me say it already twice. We take a stance. Isn't it interesting that phrase that you understand, taking a stance, is literally embodied, comes out of our experience. I stand here on my ground from this perspective. I mean, you know, how solid is that? Right? But exactly, are you ready to shift ground? Are you ready to take a different stance? Or I really like that old English word that is not very much in our vocabulary these days, to have an attitude. An attitude just means that you have a particular bodily posture. You have an attitude. One could have an attitude of, well, so you think you know something, do you? See, I don't breathe very much like this. Yeah. Or I can have a different attitude. Hello. Yeah. So I'll finish like this, and then Jen, you can come and chat. My wife, Joanne, studied to be an anthropologist. And she studied with a lady called Drid Williams, who came from the United States. Now, Drid Williams was part of that generation of contemporary dancers that emerged, who kind of liberated themselves away from classical ballet and all those formal styles, but eventually formed styles of their own that became formal styles. So that's the way it goes, right? Drid Williams, as an anthropologist, actually, she wasn't an anthropologist since that time. She went over to Africa to study African dance. And at a certain moment in time, she realized that all the movements that she was watching the dancers do, she was interpreting from her perspective. She was overlaying her United States, you know, middle-class points of view on these dance styles. Yeah? And you can see in that quote, this is something coming back from you, from a person who's an American Indian heritage. At that point, at the age of 52, she decided, I better do something about it. So she read a little bit of anthropology, and then she did what she called a personal anthropology. What values am I bringing to the table? What is it that I'm overlaying? And from that, she went on to study anthropology at Oxford, got a PhD at the age of 56, 58, whatever she was, and became a professor of anthropology, teaching anthropology of human movement to dancers and actors over at New York State University. And her theory was ahead of its time. It's one of these, it's a Moshe story. If her and Moshe got together, They'd have fights. She thought Moshe was a guru. I gave her Elusive Obvious to read. She goes, he's a guru. And she read it again. So, yeah, he's got some good ideas. So her idea, her thinking was ahead of its time. And I think you got a little bit of that conversation the other day when I was talking about Tai Chi. And I shared in the group, there are systems of human motion that are learned and are very culturally specific, what she called human action systems. Tai Chi is one of them. If you think about church events, masses, the liturgy, certain practices, even the way that people come around a dinner table at night, there's a certain practices, and everything is defined in terms of the meanings of those activities. If you just look at the movements themselves in separation from the context, they're just movements. They're just movements. So the other day, so that's an interesting point of view. The second one, and this is the last thing I'll say at this moment about this, she had a language-based understanding of motion. And in the same way that you can have sounds, because we're born into this world making having the potential of making every sound possible. Yeah, we can make every sound ever uttered in this world as an infant. And out of that huge collection of sounds, certain sounds get selected for. By whom? Your parents. Now, out of those sounds, certain sounds become meaningful phonetics, and then they get put into meaningful chunks that make distinctions, like man, men, A and E make a difference. Yeah? Fat and fed, no, that's a different one. Anyway, so these basic structures get compounded into a meaningful word. I found that fascinating because Moshe speaks in the same way. This is his example. You have these movements. The movements are composed, put together in some sort of relationship, and then those relationships are put into a context, and that context has meaning. There's actually a parallel between the two. So actually, these two people were actually very close in their analysis of human activity. And because of that influence of Drid Williams, and because of my history of dance notation, that's basically how I think my way through a movement. You show me an action, I could deconstruct it into its elements, down to the phonetics, the feeling, the sound, all right? And then put it back into the context. So whatever you show me, I kind of deconstruct it like that. So that's kind of how I work. And on Friday morning, Jenny and I and Lisa will share with you a little bit about how we all work. So that's just the thing. Okay. Speech.
Yeah. The fascinating thing about that is that it actually sculpts.
Absolutely.
So the formation of the baby is sculpted by the sound.
Yep.
So it's a two-way thing.
Yeah. Especially when you're so plastic. So both structurally and I guess neurally is structurally, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it actually forms the mouth in ways so that some sounds are easier to speak because you physically have the structures.
That's right. So so your environment is literally shaping you. Not because it impacts on you, but because you, as a child, need to relate to the parents. This is the dependency thing that he writes about. You are dependent.
It's also the love thing, that the child wants to express their love. Because we get a bit biological about it, but it's also this longing to be.
Yes, I'm glad you put that perspective on it. Yeah, it's right. Yep. Okay. So we literally get shaped. More about that tomorrow. and I'll try not to be too heavy-handed about it. You ready? Come on. You just got to remember, I get a little bit of attached to my points of view. Oh, okay.
Okay, you may have noticed that I believe that learning goes better when it's a little lighter and there's some laughter, so feel free, just as a contrast. No. Over these couple of weeks, you've had the opportunity to watch us giving FIs and to ask questions. Now, there's an art to asking questions, as you're probably discovering. You've probably asked various questions and thought, oh, okay, I got the answer, but am I any more enlightened? And so if we think back to when we're developing language and developing our sense of the world and how life works, little kids ask simple questions. What are you doing? And many of you have begun there. What are you doing? Now, I can give you a simple answer. I'm sitting on the floor. Or I can give you a more in-depth answer. But it's easier to find that in-depth answer if the question brings that out of me. So what is it that you want to know? There's a whole kind of panorama of aspects of what I'm doing that might be interesting. So it could be around what am I noticing or observing. It could be around what am I doing with that information? What decisions am I making? What ideas have I got about what I think might be possible? What plans am I making in terms of what I want to explore or evoke in the person? Then there's probably a bunch of questions around, again, so what happened? What did you notice when you tried enacting that plan? And so what are you thinking about that as a result? What's your reflection on that cycle of gathering information, making a plan, doing something, and then seeing what happened? And so I thought, rather than just kind of try and make a list of questions, we could make it into a little bit of a game to see if that just evokes other things popping out. So the way the game goes is you get into a group of 4. Okay, you have some paper. Somebody needs to provide a pen. Okay. Person 1 gets to sit or lie on the floor. Person 2, listen very carefully to these words, makes a connection with person 1. Okay. Person 3 gets to roll the dice and then check the chart, which indicates the part of person 1 that person 2 is making contact through. Okay? So it's not just put your hand on their head, it's make contact with the person through that part. You want to say something? Yeah. Well, sorry, the sequence is not quite like that. Person 2 will make contact with person 1. That's correct. We've got to get the language absolutely precise. Okay, person 2 will make contact according to what happens when person 3 throws a dice and checks the list. Then, once contact is established, all four of you will start to generate questions. Person two doesn't have to actually do anything except maintain that relationship. So you've got a connection to somebody else is connected to you. Somebody is completely free now to observe and sense and think and speculate, and person four has a pen and a paper to capture the pearls that kind of pop out of that shared experience. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes, and then I'll probably call change or words to that effect. And the roles rotate one to the left, and away we go again. Okay? Clear and simple. And the idea is to generate as many questions as you can. Now, you remember in the past we played a game with generating open-ended questions or exploratory questions. These are the kind of questions that provoke learning in both the asker and the answerer. So they might be, you know, how do you know questions, or what are you noticing? What you thinking? What are your ideas? All right. So all the things you want to know about FI,